yards during the sack, right? Now, these numbers that we're looking at, we haven't selected any players. So these are the total number of yards, these are the total values of each one of these entities, for the entire league until we select a player. And then once we select a player or a quarterback, then we'll see how this player was affected. So before I start selecting players, I'm just giving you an idea of what the visualizations are actually showing. Now, I come over to this visual. This visual is called a funnel. So we brought in a funnel and we said, hey, we want to see the top 10 in passing yards. All the time, we're looking at our favorite sports shows and they say, hey, we're top 10 in passing and top 10 in this, we're top 10 in that. So for the quarterbacks, we're looking at top 10 in passing yards, right? We're looking at top 10 in passing yards. And if you follow professional football last season, you know that Tua Tagovailoa was the leader in passing yards. And as we come over to passing yards, we see that the maximum number of passing yards for a player was 46.24. So basically, to read this, if you weren't following before, we've got passing yards. And on the passing yard gauge, the maximum passing yards was 46.24. Tua Tagovailoa was the leader in passing yards. So what that means is this number is representing what his passing yards were. A -7 was what someone else had in passing yards. You say, well, how do you don't throw the ball backwards? Yeah, if you throw an interception, and let's just say you throw it you pass the ball one time. Let's say you are on the 7-yard line and you throw an interception, and they go in for a touchdown on the pick 6. That's a -7 yards in your stats. I'm not exactly sure that's how that particular play went, but that's how you could come up with a -7 yards. Now, going back to passing yards. So, the top 10 passing leaders: Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff, Dak Prescott, Josh Allen, Brock Purdy, Patrick Mahomes, Jordan Love, C.J. Stroud, Baker Mayfield, Trevor Lawrence. These are the top 10 in passing yards for the season of last year. Whether you like Tua Tagovailoa, whether you like Dak Prescott, whether you like Josh Allen, there was a lot of conversation as to if either of those guys were as good as they claim to be. But when you look at the numbers don't lie, right? The numbers don't lie. So here we see who the top 10 passing leaders were. Then we come down to top 10 quarterback touchdowns. Now we've got Dak Prescott, Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, Jared Goff, Josh Allen, Tua Tagovailoa, Baker Mayfield, Patrick Mahomes, Russell Wilson, and Derek Carr. Now, we see the top 10 quarterbacks in touchdowns. Whether you like Dak Prescott, whether you like Jordan Love, whether you like Brock Purdy, the numbers don't lie, right? These guys were top in the category when it comes to passing touchdowns. Then we get to evaluate as well or analyze, there's some guys that are passing leaders that were not that weren't touchdown leaders, and there were some guys that were touchdown leaders that were not passing leaders. Then there were guys that were leaders in both. Whether you like those guys that are leaders in both, it doesn't matter. The numbers don't lie. But at the end of the day, we're not trying to convince you of who are leaders and who are stars in professional football. We're just creating a tool, a dashboard, so that you can see who these guys are at the blink of an eye. Now, how does that help anyone? Of course, again, if you are evaluating your players that you're picking for your fantasy team, now you're able to make some sound judgment. If you're evaluating, how you're making your online betting, now you can use some judgment, some solid statistics, and not have to go back and forth between websites, because the data is here. We come over to interceptions, and we colored the interceptions in red because that was a negative number. We colored the sacks in red because those were the negative numbers. We colored the sack yards in red because those were negative numbers. Again, these are the total value of all interceptions in the league, all sacks in the league, all sack yards that were lost by quarterbacks in the league. When we select individual quarterbacks, then we're going to see what their interceptions actually were, what their sacks actually were, what their sack yards actually were. Now, as we come over to the donut chart here, we see that we're comparing touchdowns to interceptions. You say, well, I thought you didn't like to see more than see the same visual over and over. In this particular case, this is not looking at the same visual over and over. What this is looking at is it's comparing the positive to the negative. And we're using the blue as positive because those are touchdowns, and we're using the reds as negative because they are interceptions. So what was the touchdown to interception ratio? That's important because just think about it. You can throw the ball. You can get, if you throw 50 touchdowns and you throw 50 interceptions, would you want that player on the field, right? If that player, and you probably won't even get to that point. If you throw 10 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, do you want that player on the field, right? And those are business decisions that management is making, right? So those are the different visuals that we use in order to build this part of the dashboard for analyzing quarterback data. The one thing that I didn't talk about up here is called the slicer. And what the slicer does is it allows us to select individual players. It allows us to select which player we want to visualize, which player's data we want to see. So if I come down and I want to select Bryce, or say CJ Stroud. I can select CJ Stroud, and now I see that CJ Stroud had 4,108 passing yards. Looking at the passing yards gauge, he had 4,108 passing yards, and I remember that. Well, we can still see that the leader was at 46.24. So the question is, how far behind was CJ Stroud behind the passing leader? He was 516 yards if you come back down to the table, because now the table visual is only showing us CJ Stroud's information. We see that CJ Stroud had 23 touchdowns. He had a quarterback rating of 100.80. He had 23 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. And again, we can see that here where he has 23 touchdowns and he has 5 interceptions. But looking at the donut, we see it all in one snapshot. He had 499 attempts, 319 completions, 8.2 yards per attempt, and a 63.90 completion percentage. If we come down and we say, hey, who else do I want to see? I want to see, who do I want to see? Let's say Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett had 224 passing yards, 23 attempts, 18 completions. Looking at the table, this is only Jacoby's information. He had 224 passing yards. He was 4,400 yards behind the leader with a 146.8 quarterback rating. Now, this is where we had a lot of conversation in our in the Zoom webinar last week. And the reason why we had questions here was because we get a player. And I'm not knocking Jacoby Brissett. This could be anybody, but I'm looking at his individual data. He has a 146.8 passer rating, a 146.8 passer rating. He also has 0 interceptions, 0 sacks, and 0 sack yards. But he only has 224 passing yards and 3 touchdowns, and he's 4,400 yards behind the passing leader. The conversation for those that are familiar with professional football was, fans of the Professional Football League it's not fair that his quarterback rating was higher. But then there were individuals that were not fans of professional football, and they were only going off the data. And the data says his quarterback rating was 146.8, right? His quarterback rating was 146.8. So it doesn't matter if someone else's quarterback rating was was lower. For instance, we see that his is 146.8. Let's just do a quick. So Jacoby Brissett was 146.8. Tua Tagovailoa, who was the passing leader, his quarterback rating was 101.1. So the conversation went like, it doesn't matter if Tua Tagovailoa's quarterback rating is lower than Jacoby Brissett, based on the analysis that are used in order to determine quarterback rating. That is what it was. And the argument on the side of those who are fans of professional football were like, well, that's not fair because he didn't play as much. He didn't throw as many passes. He didn't have as many passing yards, and he didn't have as many touchdowns, but he didn't have any interceptions. He didn't have any sacks. He didn't have any sack yards, and that should not come into play. It needs to be something more. It needs to be a better evaluation tool. And basically, what we came to agreement on in the middle was, you get a player such as Jacoby Brissett, who was at 146, and a player who was at like Tua Tagovailoa, who was at 101. To make it fair, you would only consider you would only consider players, or you would only compare players based on their passing yards, which means we would create a filter for quarterback rating. And that filter would be, yes, we want quarterback ratings. We want to see the quarterback rating of players who had a minimum number of passing yards. And let's just say that minimum number of passing yards was 2,000. Now, you still could probably have some of the same arguments, because you could have a player with 2,000 passing yards having a better quarterback rating than the player who had 4,000 passing yards and had a lower rating. But at some point, we have to make a determination of how we're going to evaluate the players. So that's why I said before, we would talk about passer rating, because that did come up and that was pretty much a hot topic. But just like here, when we say passing leaders, right? We said top 10 passing leaders. We didn't say top 10 passing leaders by percentages, because someone could have less passing attempts and a higher percentage. Bottom line is, we said the top 10 passing leaders by total, top 10 passing leaders by total number of passing yards, top 10 quarterbacks by touchdowns, by total touchdowns. And at that point, there's no question. But that quarterback rating did come into play. Will come into question, which led us to a very heated and hot topic. So with that said, I hope that you have already liked this video and subscribed to this channel. Again, like this video and subscribe to this channel, because it does help us out when it comes to boosting the algorithm. And I hope that you really learned something here when it comes to building our dashboards. If you have any questions, I look forward to seeing you in our next Zoom webinar. I definitely would like to see you in our next Zoom webinar as we create exciting projects and talk about what we really could do when it comes to the world of business intelligence as we know it. So once again, thanks for joining in, watching this video. Thanks for joining in and watching this video. And I look forward to seeing you win again in the next video.